Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Controversial Truth Podcast. I'm Greg.
I'm Tony.
And we are back from our little bit of a break over Thanksgiving weekend or week. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Enjoyed some time with your family. We did. We had some food, lots of it. So we're back today doing atheism and why it falls apart for several reasons. A little bit of a disclaimer. We're not attacking anybody that claims to be an atheist. We're not trying to be mean or in any way, but we do want to stand on truth and assert the fact that we believe firmly in the Bible and in the scriptures, and that disproves, well, that and many other things disprove the atheistic position. So we're going to have a conversation about that today. We hope that you enjoy. We'd also ask that you would share this and like it, or do whatever you can to just spread it around if you feel so inclined. If you enjoy this, if you get anything beneficial out of it, it would really help us out. Even just the smallest of things with the algorithms and the way that it works. If you like it, if you obviously if you share it, but even if you subscribe to the channel or whatever, it helps to get this information out there to more people and hopefully benefit more people. So we thank you in advance for that. And without further ado, let's get into this thing.
Sure, sounds good.
All right, so do you want to start off?
You can actually. Okay. With the science stuff, we kind of went in different directions with how we planned for this.
Right. Yeah. So I have a lot of, because I think as far as obviously I've looked into the philosophical reasons as to why it falls apart, but I think for the majority of my research, I've read a number of books on different topics like this that all tie into it and everything like that. So that's kind of where the focus of my knowledge is on this particular topic, and an area of interest of mine, I guess. So anyway, I guess let's start with the definition of atheism, just to kind of get that out there. Sure. Everybody, I think, knows what it means, but basically A is the negation of theism, so no God, the belief in no God. And I think we said in the last episode, if I remember from 2 weeks ago, actually I think it was 3 weeks ago when we filmed it, that we had mentioned, at least in my personal experience, that most of the time when I've come across people that claim to be atheists, most of the time they end up being agnostic. They are usually agnostic. Yeah. A lot of times they don't actually track with all that goes with being atheist, and it doesn't really take a lot to make them think like, oh, okay, maybe I don't know that there's a God, but I also don't, I guess I can't dismiss it entirely. So anyway, that's kind of the definition and just a little precursor there. But one of the main reasons that I found in reading a couple of the different books and just diving into some of those things has been the origin of life research that's been done, particularly when it comes to there's a let me see if I wrote it down here. I can't remember if I did or not. I probably have it in there somewhere, but there's a lot of notes. But anyway, that probably for me was the number one argument when I was looking into this. That really kind of was like, okay, I mean, obviously I knew when I've been a Christian for a while that there was a God and all this sort of thing, but kind of the arguments that sort of solidified that there had to be a God for me, not only because of my experiences, but because of these factual things that they were talking about. And so you have all of these different things going on. Like one of the things that I think is most interesting, and I'm just going to kind of be very vague here and then maybe get into more specific things here in a bit. But I think one of the biggest things that I found as I was doing some of this research is realizing that for a long time, like Big Bang Theory, that was kind of widely accepted for a while among atheists, among the secular community. And actually there's starting to be a drift away from that. So we now know definitively through scientific evidence that the Earth that the universe had a beginning, right? So we call that a singularity.
So in that way, the Big Bang Theory
is correct.
Is true, yes.
Right. And so you have what we call the red shift, which is that we see that the universe is expanding. Basically, pretty much every scientist agrees on that. And so from that they calculate that, okay, the Earth is, or the universe is this old. But basically what it boils down, everybody has their different calculations on how old it is, but essentially everyone agrees that the universe had a beginning.
If stuff is expanding, if stuff is spreading out further away from each other from basically like a center point, then if you could play time in reverse, everything would eventually condense into one singular point.
Yep. And so you're starting to see, like you had, so the Big Bang Theory, which was, like I said, when I was going into the history of this, the Big Bang Theory was fairly widely accepted for a while. And now you even see like, there was an interview done like with Richard Dawkins, who is one of the most atheistic proponents out there as far as, within the scientific community and stuff like that. Anyway, he was in an interview talking to somebody, I can't remember who exactly it was, but basically he was talking and he was asked about pansperma, which is like ancient alien type stuff, like the idea that we were planted here on Earth by someone else or a different, and he actually was kind of like, yes, that might be a possibility, and so that you have all these like crazy theories coming into play. You have the multiverse theory that are coming into play in a lot of the secular realms, because they understand that if the Earth had a beginning, there's no way to explain the beginning of the Earth or the universe without God. There is no possibility for that. Even the Big Bang Theory itself, which again was widely held for a while, falls apart without a catalyst to start that initial explosion that created everything.
So they keep shifting to something else every time that like they realize it doesn't make sense. So I think before the Big Bang Theory, it was like the universe is eternal.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
And then like thermodynamics, the laws of thermodynamics disprove that because everything would have stopped moving by now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you can go eternally in the past, energy would have run out. Stuff would have stopped by now. So they're like, oh, I guess it's not eternal. Then Big Bang Theory, and then they're like, oh, if it has a beginning, then how did the beginning happen? Where'd that stuff come from? If everything that is possibly in existence is in one tiny point, like what sort of, there's no outside catalyst that can cause anything to change ever. And so they just bounce from one theory to the next theory to the next theory. Doing anything they can to.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, as I've been reading, because I've been reading a lot of secular literature, or at least excerpts from it, to try to like figure out where it's going and different things like that, and trying to keep track historically of the secular arguments as far as how this stuff plays out. And it really has just been a nonstop. They're just constantly changing their opinions because they're trying their best to get around the fact that there has to be a God.
Anything but God.
Anything but God. They're stretching constantly, and you can see that in their writings. And some of them, like Stephen Hawking, has admitted it. They've come right out and said, like, I several of them have said things that kind of allude to the fact that, like, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure about this sort of thing. Like when pressed about a question that has to do with origin of life, origin of the universe, origin of matter, those sorts of things. So that was kind of,
they rule out God as even a possibility,
right? Exactly,
which is, I don't know, it's crazy to rule it out completely to the point where you're like, no, it's not an option. Let's explore every other possible
and then
option.
you make your scientific research based on the presupposition that there is no God, and you search for evidence that there is no God, rather than kind of dialing it back and saying, let's just look and see what the evidence presents us.
And I don't know if it was Richard Dawkins, but I don't know if it was a debate or something with atheists or non-atheists, something like that. And they were like, what if God did show himself? Like, what if you saw like a finger come out of the sky and like, reveal himself or something like that? And he's like, would you believe in God then? And he said, no. I was like, I would find another way to prove, like, try to figure out what that is. And it's not God. It's pretty much anything but God, like we said.
Yep. And that was kind of where, like, I didn't have a whole lot of scripture for this one because we're trying to use extra biblical evidence for this.
The atheist doesn't care about
scripture. Exactly. So, some Christians will have qualms with that and be like,
I have a couple of verses.
I have a couple of verses, but I mean, the main one that comes to mind when I think of this is that, the one I didn't even write it down as far as the reference goes, but the verse where it says that they will deny the truth, or they will suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Yeah. Right. And that's kind of what it boils down to. I think for a lot of people is like, they realize that if there is a God, it means this for my life. And so therefore I'm going to actually deny that there's a God with everything in me. I'm going to scratch and bite and kick to find something else other than God, so that I can continue to live my life in the way that I want to and be my own God.
I watched something on that. I think it's Psalm 14:1. I'm not sure. You can look that up while I'm talking for a minute if you could.
I don't have my phone. My phone's doing the...
You have a real Bible right there.
Duh, I forget I have a Bible sometimes. So what did you say?
Psalm 14:1.
You have a Bible?
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I'm like, maybe that's not a Bible or something.
Yeah, it's a Bible.
But while you're doing that, some other verses I have are Romans 1:25, John 3:19. So what's Psalm 14:1?
Psalm 14:1 says, "For the music director of David, the fool said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good." Okay. I'm guessing you're just talking about the fool says in his heart, there is no God.
One. But the one that you were talking about, the Bible says like they are suppressing it, the knowledge that they do have or did have. So that doesn't mean on its surface it's like that sounds like that they're actively suppressing it, like they know it but they're suppressing it and trying to live like a secret life of but
that's how some people take it.
That is how some people take it, but that's not really what it means.
Right.
I do believe that at one point everyone kind of starts off believing in a God, and you have to fall away from that sort of over time for whatever reasons. But it's not like they're lying to people. It means that you can reach a point, I think, where you have successfully convinced yourself that maybe there is no God, through like an active, like you don't want to believe it, and then you get to the point where you truly don't believe it.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely.
You decided not to believe it, pretty much.
And it's so hard to have this conversation. Obviously, you and I are biased in this.
We are completely, yeah.
And we have to admit our bias. But one of the things that's funny,
but we're not. I think it's good that we're not blindly biased. Like we don't believe what we believe strictly because we were raised to believe these things. We both reached a point where we were like called stuff into question, needed non-biblical sources to answer these things. It's not just like a blind faith and we believe in fairy tales and stuff. We do like science and philosophy and other ways that helped solidify our faith and prove stuff.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's where I kind of have qualms with a lot of the Reformed community, I think, because I think a lot of them, at least that I've listened to, a lot of people that I respect, I think they'll kind of like insist, not that you don't look extra biblically for things, but that like it always has to boil back to scripture in the sense that like that's where you, and I do agree that's where you start from, but I think sometimes they get carried away with like ignoring the extra biblical evidence because it is inferior to scripture.
Even the Bible tells us to look at extra biblical evidence in nature and such. It's like, all right, if you don't, if this book isn't, I don't know, enough, I guess. You can't prove the book using the book.
Yeah.
Which is why we're all still accountable, because nature and the heavens declare the glory of God anyway. So.
Exactly. So yeah, there's so much to it. So anyway, let's get back into the science argument. So kind of straight off there. Yeah. One of the other arguments for me that was actually, I would say probably this one is the most crucial for me as far as the scientific argument goes, is the argument of the fine-tuning principle of the universe.
Who did you listen to for these?
So
I think I listened to the same guy.
Yeah, so I have a lot of references. So a couple of the books that I read was by Stephen Meyer. So he's got a couple of books where I know I wrote them down on here. I've got so many notes.
Yeah, me too. But I remember I looked at one and there was a guy who had like a list of like 5 or something, and fine tuning was one of them.
Yeah, so here I have the list because I was planning on telling this later, but it's down at the bottom. So 2 books that I recommend by Stephen Meyer is The Return to the God Hypothesis and Signature in the Cell. That's by Stephen Meyer. Those are the 2 that like really dive into the fine tuning argument, and then
very intelligent, qualified to speak on these things guy.
Yes, he has all of the credentials and stuff like that. Like, I mean, we're just reiterating kind of what they're teaching us. Yeah. We're not actually the scientists that go in and, do these tests and stuff like that, or study these things, but it's cool to know. It doesn't, and sometimes I think people will be like, oh, you're automatically disqualified because you don't have the credentials. It's like, no, I still am taking my research seriously. I'm just not a firsthand source. You know what I mean? Like
you're not a scientific scholar.
Right, exactly. I mean, but I'm still getting my information from people who have their credentials and stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody should listen to me and be like, oh, well, Greg said, I mean, you look into it yourself, sort of thing. But I think that there's still something to be said for even relaying information. So that's one. 2 of the books. And Stephen Meyer, he's a Christian. So he's a little bit of a biased source, but a really good book that I also enjoyed. And it's actually kind of funny. Like, he has some good stuff in it by a guy that's not a Christian. He's just what he considers himself a deist. Is David Berlinski in the book The Devil's Delusion. That was a really good book because it was from a perspective outside the Christian community, And it's funny because the entire time I'm reading the book, I'm like, how are you not a Christian?
So is that a guy that like sees like clear evidence of a creator, but doesn't know if that creator is the God of any particular religion?
Yeah, so he doesn't ascribe to a religion, so that's why he considers himself a deist. At least he did when he wrote this book. This was a number of years ago. I mean, maybe it's changed now. I don't keep like tabs on him, but at the time when I was reading his book and stuff like that, I think he considered himself a deist, which is just basically I believe that there is a higher power. Yeah. He doesn't name the higher power. He doesn't really quantify it in any terms. But basically, that there has to be a higher power. He uses things like the fine tuning argument, a couple of different arguments. But yeah, like I said, his book is actually it's insightful in so many ways, but it's entertaining. It's funny. He's like kind of a funny guy, and he's also, if you want to talk about credentials, he's like one of the world's leading mathematicians, I think is what it is. And he does like a ton of stuff like in this. I can't remember exactly. I didn't write all that stuff down, but
so what is the fine tuning? What is that like? What does that mean?
So the fine tuning argument basically boils down to the fact that like if you look at the cell, so like Stephen Meyer had that one book called The Signature in the Cell, right? And so he actually goes into the scientific breakup of it or makeup of a cell, right? And all the things that are contained in a cell. So years and years ago when they first discovered the cell, they thought that it was simple. That was they thought that it was just kind of like this self-sustained blob basically, and they didn't really know too much about it. But now that we have the scientific equipment to actually look inside a cell, see what makes it
complex,
see what the
fragile,
the complexity of it, the fragility of it, all of these things make up what we call the fine-tuning argument. So basically, it boils down to math is what it kind of boils down to in the end, and saying that okay, if you have like this DNA cell. We know the DNA strands. Like if you stretch a DNA strand out, a human DNA, like a single one, I think I wrote this down here. I think it's 2 meters, just of stretching out.
Yeah, that's insane.
And then if you stretch out all of the DNA in a person's body, let's see. I wrote this down. Man, I really should have got my notes a little bit better together. Okay, so
me with mine.
All right, so. Twice the diameter of the solar system. So if you took all of the cells in a human body.
One human
body, all of the cells, stretch the DNA out according to scientific research, then you would actually be able to go twice the distance of the solar system with one human, all of the cells in their body, which I mean makes sense because you think of like millions and millions and millions of cells. If one tiny crazy cell goes 2 meters, so I mean it makes sense if you think about it. But anyway, so you've got these DNA cells, right? That these strands of DNA contain code. Basically, it boils down to like information. That's what it boils down to. And so if you think of the Earth and what they say that we came from, as far as the evolutionary argument comes from, we basically came from a cesspool of I think like they say elements, prebiotic soup basically is what they say. And so anyway, and then acted on by like lightning and different sorts of things. They've done some experiments on this. Supposedly we get a cell from that, right? From the complex chemicals.
However much time you need.
Over so much time. So anyway, it is mathematically impossible. This is what the fine-tuning argument proves, is basically that like it is mathematically impossible for this to happen because of the complexity of a cell, because of the complexity of life. We cannot possibly replicate this. And like one of the things that Stephen Meyer does a really good job in his book, he gives you like good examples. He dumbs the book down enough for people like me to be able to be like, oh, okay, that makes sense, because he's talking these numbers, he's talking about all these types of building blocks for the cell, the amino acids, all that sort of thing. And I'm like, I kind of grasped a little bit of it, but most of it goes over my head. But he does a good job of laying it out in a way that makes it, accessible for the layperson. And anyway, one of the examples that he kind of gives, and I'm not quoting this exactly, but basically he's like, okay, if you were to take like a bunch of Scrabble letters, right? An entire Scrabble letter, let's say there's 100 letters there, and you were to shake that up and throw it on the floor, how many times would you have to do that before every letter lined up in a perfect sequence to make a coherent sentence? Spelled right, perfectly in order. He's like, in that chance there, he calculates the chance of this. He uses the Scrabble example. I don't remember the number exactly, the chance, but it was a comprehensible number. He's like, this number is comprehensible. This is how, mathematically speaking, what your chances would be of getting an actual sentence from these 100 letters. And it was a big number, but it was a comprehensible number. Sure. And then he's like, okay, so the cell has like 57 to the 7th by some crazy number.
Yeah.
And this is all, stuff you can go look at, different things. As far as if you want to get the actual numbers, I wasn't going to try to go through every single number. I think it was irrelevant for the point of this conversation. But basically the gist of it is this giant number represents how much more information would be required for the DNA versus these 100 Scrabble pieces. And he's like, and then you have the compounding of the chance of that lining up perfectly in order to actually get you that first cell. It is mathematically impossible. And
so like imagine like a million Scrabble pieces,
more than a million, but
like hypothetically for like people's minds to wrap around, like a million Scrabble pieces,
right?
Throw them in the air, and then when they land, it forms like a perfect novel. Like everything like flows together and needs each other to work, and it does.
One thing's out of place and it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. Someone else described it as like if you had all the pieces of a 747 airplane laid out like on the ground, and like a tornado went over it, like the chances of it forming a functional plane is how likely that is for like DNA or a cell to come from chaos and no intelligent designer outside of it.
Yeah. And another good guy that's really good about this topic is James Tour. I've listened to him a lot. I think he has a book, but I didn't read it, but he said that the book was terrible. Anyway, but he's got a lot of seminars, and he actually is one of, again, to give the credentials of the person that I'm citing, he actually does this stuff for a living. So he has an organization that works on like, I want to say nanobots, but it's not actually nanobots. I think nanobots is like from a movie that I'm thinking of. But basically, it's the same.
I think
concept.
You're right. Yeah, it's like microscopic, like robots, almost.
Right? But they
for health.
Right. They actually use like cells and
such.
stuff like that. Yeah, it's not actually like mechanical things that go in, but it's basically like programmable cells. Yeah, is basically what he works on. And this is like legitimate stuff that's being researched and developed right now. It's it's insane. Some of the stuff, but this is like actual stuff that he does for a living. So, and then he has all these, aside from his actual work in those fields, he has a whole series on like abiogenesis and stuff like that, and different things like that give you a little bit better of an understanding of the nuts and bolts of what it takes to build a cell. The complexity thereof. And it's absolutely mind-blowing. Like when I listened to him, again, like most of the stuff I couldn't recite it to you, and I didn't bother for this episode to like go back and memorize it or write it down, but like as I'm listening to him and he's describing the intricacies of the cell, the intricacies of the world in which we live, the world that makes us up, and I'm just like overwhelmed with like, God, you're so good. You know what I mean? Like, how did you come up? Like, it's incredible. Yeah. It's insane. And then the more that we know, the more technology that we get to look inside the cell, to look out further in the solar system, to explore our seas, the more and more it's like, this didn't come about by chance. Well, there's no possible way. And so that's a broad answer for the fine-tuning argument.
And it's true. Like like in college, in like my anatomy and physiology classes, just getting like deep diving into science. It's like there's no way that any of this could have just happened, like without an intelligent, outside force. Especially because like we talked about like how basically impossible it is for a cell to form in just by itself.
Yeah.
But we didn't even touch on the fact that like, even if you give people a freebie, like give atheists like or evolutionists or whatever, give them a cell, a pre-made perfect cell, functional cell, it's going to die.
Yeah.
It doesn't know that it needs to replicate. It doesn't know that it needs energy. It doesn't know that it needs anything.
Yeah.
And it'll die. And I don't know, you'd be back at square one. Once that fragile cell dies, that's it. Like you'd have an endless cycle of single cell organisms dying and never becoming multicellular organisms. And I don't know, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is. And like a lot of those experiments that they've done,
where they say they've created like life.
Right. So like Francis Crick, for example, I have him down as an example here. He's the guy that discovered the double helix structure on the DNA.
Yeah.
He did a lot of experiments. I don't remember the exact date of them, so I don't want to try to say stuff that I don't exactly know.
40s.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
It was a while ago, but anyway, he did
It's
a
a
bunch
black
of
and white picture, so
yeah,
it gives
he
you a
did
range.
a bunch of experiments that basically paved the way for a lot of the atheistic arguments and stuff like that, because he was able to, in a beaker, basically not even create a cell, but he was able to, I think he just really fundamentally manipulated DNA. But he's had the building blocks basically to start with, first of all, when a lot of these experiments. And then the other problem is, like, they're doing it inside a lab.
Yeah, they're still doing that today. They're like, oh, we created a functioning cell. It's like, but they started with like a 90% functioning cell.
Right,
almost.
exactly.
And they're like, oh, we've created life. And it's
Yeah,
like,
exactly. And it doesn't work that way. Not
components.
only are you in a clean room where you've got all of the most advanced equipment, and the craziest thing to me is that you've got a notebook, right? Yeah. It's like the simplest of things. Like, you do something wrong. So a lot of these guys, they start with something, they get it wrong, and they notate, that didn't work.
Yeah, not
and
to
then
do
they go
it
on to
again.
the next one.
Yeah.
A non-guided,
a mindless pool of stuff wouldn't know that.
It doesn't have that. So I mean, there's another factor there that you don't have. Like, if you just think, like, okay, this one tried, it failed, it moves on to the next one, then eventually, yes, you get to the place where it works. Yeah. But if you have an unguided thing that doesn't know that this one didn't work, and so it won't try that again, then it's just going to continue trying things that it already tried, and they're going to continue failing. And that's because it's unguided. It's random. And that's so their own principles defeat their ideas of how this stuff works, because again, you can't actually.
And then when they successfully do it, they act like it's possible to do without that outside force, completely ignoring the fact that the highest of intelligence of people, it took them to make this cell with
the stuff already
with
there,
tools and everything. So it's like, oh, we've created something using our intelligence, and we're going to try to use that to prove that things were created without intelligence.
And that's where that guy that I was talking about before, James Tour, he kind of comes in, and he's like, because he actually does this stuff. He makes these things, and he's like, they'll tell you, they'll straight up lie to you that they've created cells. And he's like, no one's ever created a cell.
No, they haven't.
He's like, I could literally give you the amino acids, all of the building blocks for a cell, and you would not be able to make a cell.
Yeah, you can't do it.
You cannot do it. He's like, the only thing that they've done is taken already living cells, like you said, and either manipulated them or added to them. Well, I don't know if you can add to, I think to remove from them is the only thing you can do, and manipulated them in ways.
Yeah.
But no one's ever created a cell. No. And if they tell you that they did, they lied to you by best available evidence.
Yeah. Which is pretty easy when you can speak it out with a bunch of words that the average person has no idea what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And most people aren't going to be like, well,
which is like one of the points he has. Like, he can read it. He knows what they're saying and like what they did, and he knows they didn't successfully do what they claimed to do.
Mm-hmm. And one of his lectures, he sits down with a stack of papers like this big, typed front and back, and he's like, this is what I had to type out in order to prove that I made this one cell do this one thing. He's like, this is the amount of information it took just for this one cell to change this one thing in this one cell for these microbots or whatever. I can't remember what they're called, but and it was literally like a stack, like as thick as my notebook. Yeah. And it was 11 by 7 paper. And he's like, this is filled out front and back, and this is what I had to prove, to type out in information and code basically to prove that this one cell did this one little minor change. He's like, it takes that much information. Imagine how much information it takes to create the cell, not just to make it do one different thing.
And that's like the simplest of single cells.
Right, exactly.
Single cell organisms, let alone like multicellular organisms. And it's
beyond fathom.
It's impossible, mathematically impossible.
And that's basically the point of the fine-tuning argument.
Okay, yeah.
So, I mean,
that's just the cellular one. Like, the fine-tuning argument kind of expands into...
Yeah, they go into the
space
the geography, or geology, I think. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. Geology.
I don't know what you're saying yet.
Like the earth science sort of thing, like how the earth actually was created as far as that goes. Okay. The likelihood of the planets actually
and the likelihood
in a way that gives you one planet that actually can support life.
Yep.
Those sorts of things.
The chances of just life being possible anywhere, even having that, even if we could come from like some sort of primordial soup or whatever it is, the chances of that soup having the right conditions to even be able to produce life is also mathematically impossible. Like, you need to be the perfect distance from the sun. Any closer you're dead. Any further away, you're dead. If the Earth, if it spins too fast, there's so much that has to come into play and be absolutely perfect for life to even be an option.
Yeah.
And we're finding that more and more, like looking for that Goldilocks zone of planets out there and the universe, and there's not too many.
No.
And even the ones we find that we think are in that perfect zone, it doesn't matter. Like
that's one where I've tried to research.
Yeah.
To be able to get somebody to give it in a way that's understandable to me as somebody who's not a scientific mind or really advanced in that stuff. I don't understand how they're able to tell. I mean, I understand okay, we see a sun there or a star there. We
from
understand
the
distance, but how do you possibly know that it has an atmosphere by looking at it from? I don't
think they know if about its atmosphere. I think that they're going strictly based off of its distance from the nearest sun.
Gotcha.
Is it it's Goldilocks? Too hot, too cold? It's just right. And even then, it might not have an atmosphere. It might not have water. It might not have anything really. It could just be a rock that's in a nice spot. Yeah. So we've not found mathematically. It seems you can't create life, and also we haven't found any outside of here.
Right.
So it seems like a special place where we're at.
Indeed.
What else you got?
I mean, there's a lot of detail here on that topic, but honestly, at this point, I'm kind of I don't know if the details really all that important.
And we will, I think we'll still get into other episodes. I think we'll still get into, do more science episodes and stuff like that.
We might actually do specific episodes that are about fine tuning and stuff like that.
About evolution and creation.
About the nuts and bolts. But I think for this episode, let's just keep it vague to get people in the door and be like, okay, maybe there is a God.
Sure.
So I don't want to spend too much time on the details. So let's just wrap up the science portion and move on to the philosophical.
All right, we're half an hour in. You want to?
Yeah, so that's perfect. Why don't you take away because I kind of led.
Okay,
the
so this is a completely different direction. So there's, like you said, there's one way to. I mean, you can try to convince an atheist if you want through science, because some of them really respond to that. But then there's the type of atheist that responds really well to philosophy, and thought, and
the
morals and such like that. So the first thing I have here is that, and I hadn't heard this until a few years ago. Atheism is a religion.
Yeah.
Which they hate to hear.
Yeah.
Of course they hate to hear it. It's the complete opposite of what they want to be associated with. But it is. And I read up on this and said, anyone who claims that they are not religious and then makes judgments based on religious topics has made a religious statement. So though they claim to be irreligious, they reveal that they are indeed religious when they attempt to refute another religious view. So if you look at a religion,
I have to explain that a little bit better because I know what you mean, but I think I've seen this argument.
Yeah.
I've never used it because I've never met an atheist that's so dogmatic that they're willing to go into arguments this deep.
Yeah.
But I've seen online people using this argument.
Yeah.
And it when I hear it, I'm like, oh, that clicks perfectly. That makes so much sense. But I feel like every time I've seen somebody use this argument, the atheist that's in conversation with them, it doesn't click with them. And I'm not saying that's because they're dumb.
Yeah.
I just think for whatever reason, this argument doesn't.
But it makes complete sense.
I know. That's what I don't.
They're like, oh no, we're not a religion. But it's but they have a take on everything that a religion has a take on. They have an active belief system with views concerning the origins of the universe, life. They have thoughts on life after death. They would say there isn't one, but that is still a point of view on that topic. The existence of God, how to behave while we're alive, and more. An honest atheist would admit that their worldview is a faith. So it's if you ask any religion in the world, they're like, oh, you'd ask their take on God, you'd ask their take on life after death, you'd ask their take on how to live while they're here on the earth. And atheists have answers to all those things that make up their belief system. They'd say there is no God. They'd say, life happened through natural processes. And they'd say there is no life after death. So they have takes on all these things, which...
Well, their dilemma usually comes in that they think all of these things are proved scientifically.
But it's still stuff that's included in their belief system. So it's it's all part of it. You can't be an atheist and have a different take on those things, really. You can't, So it's like it has all the makings of a religion, minus.
Right. And that sets up the self-defeating argument too of like
that is all of my notes is like self-defeating arguments pretty
exactly much. And if you don't believe in a God, if you believe that there is nothing, that everything is random chance, and that we're going nowhere, we have no destiny other than death, and that's it,
yeah, then
you have no moral standing to say anything's wrong.
You are correct.
And that's where it really bugs me, like, because I feel like I've seen this argument used, and it just, again, this is one of those ones that really doesn't click, because they'll be like, you'll see somebody, and this is all, again, me just seeing stuff, because I like to watch interactions online, because I don't get to have these interactions.
Have you seen the Jeff Durbin, James so White, they're double teaming like a team of atheists, and it's like 2 hours long, and it gets I watched like pretty 90, hectic. I don't even say 90, but I probably got 75% of the way through it, and I was like, I have a headache. It got to the point where they were just like arguing, and I was like, I can't do this. Man. It was good at the beginning when they were like actually respectful, and then like both sides were just like, and I was like, all right, this is not Christian like of them. I was frustrated with it, so I turned it off. Okay. But I've seen some debates. Actually, a good one that I really enjoy listening to his debates, because he is respectful, and I can't really speak very. I can't speak to his character very well, but Kent Hovind. He's a strange. I knew who you were talking about when you said that. I can't speak to his character. Yeah, he's gotten in some trouble for some stuff that we would disagree with. But he is intelligent. He's a smart guy. He's good at debating. Yep, very good at debating, and he's respectful, at least in his debates. And so I appreciate that. If I want to go someplace and look at an actual formal debate, I usually go to him, because he's good at it, and he's respectful, and usually his opponents are respectful of him and stuff. So I usually go to him, and he's got some really good debates out there that are very interesting. He's obviously very against evolution. He's kind of a proponent of the flood and a lot of the earth science that goes along with that stuff, which we'll probably get into again in a different episode. But. So you mentioned like they shouldn't have a take really on morality, right? Atheists. Yeah, like it doesn't make sense. Well, I don't want to. I know you have your notes on this. I have so much. You kind of take the lead on this. Okay. I could talk about it for an hour, and I've already talked a lot. So I want to hear your thoughts on it more. So yeah, give me the spin on that, because I know we've probably seen a lot of the same content as far as this goes. So yeah, like just to kind of prod you a little bit and play devil's advocate, right? So if I was an atheist saying like, I think it's wrong to murder, as an atheist, how would you respond to that? Because I think that's an interesting one that I've seen where I'm like, oh, that doesn't really make any sense from the atheist perspective. Okay. So let me read, I got like 2 quotes, and then I have some stuff on that specifically. So if the universe, as the atheists believe, has no meaning, no reason, no purpose, no good, no evil, and we are simply the byproduct of chemical reactions, then you should also believe that spending time trying to convince other people that God does not exist would be a pointless waste of time. Not to mention, if you conclude that our thoughts are just random chemical processes and reactions as a result of chaos and evolutionary processes, then your own thoughts on God not existing aren't reliable. And then I have a C.S. Lewis quote it's C.S. Lewis on Reasoning to Atheism. He said, "Supposing there was no intelligent life behind the universe, no creative mind, in that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. It is merely that when atoms inside my skull happened, for physical or chemical reasons, to arrange themselves in a certain way, this gives me, as a byproduct, the sensation I call thought. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? If I can't trust my own thinking, of course, I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I cannot believe in thought. So I can never use thought to disbelieve in God," which I would completely agree with. Yeah, that's deep though, and it's kind of there's a lot to chew on there. It's like if our thoughts are random. Shoot, I just totally kicked your camera. That's okay. Christian. Most people just listen anyways, right? A little bit to the left. Help me out here. That's your right. Good. Oh. Other way. That way? Yeah, a little bit more to the right. That's your left. There you go. This is funny. Yeah, you good? Yeah. Okay. Greg kicked my camera. Bummer. So yeah, for those of you that weren't watching that fiasco, we just spent a little bit of time moving a camera around. You did. All right. So basically, like if you're if there's no basis for your thoughts, if there's no ultimate morality, if there's no reason for any of this, and your thoughts are just random chemical reactions that you kind of had no reason, you can't help but think because it's just chemicals firing, then whatever conclusions you come to about anything aren't reliable because there's nothing. What are they leaning on? There's nothing. They're not standing on anything. They can just be as flawed as anything. So that was a good quote that I had. And
that kind of comes back to the science argument a little bit of not necessarily the fine tuning. Well, a little bit of the fine tuning, but one of the things that he said in there kind of made me think of this. As far as like intelligent design goes, whenever we think of anything, like if I was just to kind of give a vague example, like if I didn't know, let's go back 20 years ago, I didn't know what a tablet was, and I was walking through the woods and I found a tablet, or anyone found a tablet and not knowing what it was, no one would pick it up and be like, oh wow, look what the rocks and dust and wind created. No, you would pick it up and you would go, someone designed this.
Of course.
No one would find a book and be like, look what the Scrabble letters created by being thrown. That is our.
You would know that someone passed by those Scrabble letters and arranged them to it.
Exactly. Yeah. Like we are, every bit of information that we come across, we ascribe to an intelligent designer, a person basically. When we see something, when I see this notepad laid out with all these words on it that form a coherent sentences, well, mostly, you assume intelligent design, you assume intelligence behind this information. Yeah. But when it comes to the most complex of information, we're like, oh no, that was random and done completely, so that kind of goes back, and that ties in a little bit because that's kind of what C.S. Lewis just said there was kind of like, I feel like a good, not segue, but a tie-in of both the scientific and the philosophical argument there, where they kind of come to a head and like, this is bam. Yeah. You have no ground to stand.
No, it definitely merges the two. It merges like philosophy and also like the knowing that you can't just have random processes that form reliable thought. That doesn't make sense. Yep. But you asked me about like murder and stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, I like where you're going with the argument, because that argument I completely agree with, but that's the one that I think fail the most, just because it's so.
I have a separate one for murder and such. That wasn't like my morality. No, I know. That was just like a separate thought.
Yeah, that one's, I think, more difficult to comprehend. Yeah, I think the moral argument.
I think the moral one's
is the one that's the easiest to comprehend and be like, actually challenge someone and be like, look, this doesn't work in your worldview. Yes. So expand on that.
So the title of this of my note, part of the note, is called Subjective Morality. So an atheist would admit that they believe in absolute morality. If you ask an atheist, is murder wrong? Was the Holocaust wrong? They would say yes. But why? What is anchoring the basis for their morality? They say they care about helping humanity, but why? Like, why do they care about helping humanity?
I think it differs depending on which person you.
A lot like the bigger ones, like the bigger atheists, they would say like, I don't believe in an afterlife. I don't believe in these things. I just want to do what I can while I'm here and help forward humanity and do whatever.
Right. The most popular argument I've heard is that society determines the morality.
Yes,
which is pretty much the best answer you can get.
It still doesn't work.
But it still doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. So if you don't have a moral lawgiver, then there cannot be objective morality. And if there's no objective morality, if there aren't things that are universally wrong because God says they are, then good and bad come down to preference. You can't call any actions universally bad because morality would have no universal foundation. Good and bad becomes subjective as opposed to objective, and just personal preference. But there are certain things that people all over the world know are wrong, and they punish people for doing these things. Murder is punished all over the world, but why? What if I personally feel that murder is fine? Who are you to impose your own personal moral preferences on me? Is what I have here. So everyone agrees with like, and you brought up the point of society determines morality almost, and I've seen interviews with atheists, and the Christian would ask the atheist, and the atheist would bring that answer up, and so the person's like, do you think the Holocaust was wrong? And they were like, yeah, of course the Holocaust is wrong. And the Christian says, what if the Germans in 1920, 1930s Germany believed it to be right. Like, are they wrong for that? And he was like, yeah, they're wrong for that. And he's like, well, then what if their society determined it to be okay? Is it still wrong? And the atheist is like, yeah. And he's like, well, then your point doesn't work. It doesn't make sense.
See, I've seen I've seen people actually kind of give some ground on this, because the whole point of a worldview is to try to remain consistent and not self-defeat and self-implode. And so when pushed on this, and you actually come across an honest atheist, somebody who's willing to have integrity throughout their entire worldview, they see the dilemma there. And I've actually seen people be like, yeah, they were right. And that's fine with my worldview. Now, and then they'll be like, but in this culture, it was wrong. But here's the problem.
It goes wrong.
We have different cultures in different worlds. We still have people today. There is cannibalistic tribes that exist in like the Amazon and different places. Very few, but there are still some. And that is accepted in their culture and in their society. So if you were to just take a plane and go hop over there from America, does that give you moral right to eat people and kill people?
Does it give them the right to kill and eat you? You should say yes.
Exactly. Yeah. In order to be consistent, you would have to say yes to that, because if society is the only thing that determines morality, then that is fine. Or and it doesn't transcend time either. Like if, obviously we don't have time travel, but and I think I've used this, I want to say I've used this on an episode before, but if I was transported back in time to, slavery, would I go back there and be like, oh, slavery's fine because it's widely accepted, not only in America but around the world? It was, back in the 1700s, slavery was the main trade of the entire world, right? Like that was how you gained wealth, was to have slaves do all your work for you, right? And whether there's different cultures were enslaving different people, but it was widely accepted. But if I was to just all of a sudden somehow transport back in time, that doesn't give me the moral right.
No, even when that stuff was going on, there were people alive at that time that knew it was wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
And people suppressing the fact that it was wrong.
Right. But it was widely accepted.
But it was accepted, yeah.
So if you were taking
acceptance doesn't make it right either.
Well, it does in an atheistic world.
It doesn't, yeah.
That's the thing. Is it and the other question I would have then is like, okay, so society determines it, so what percentage of society? If you have 51%, does that then you have to accept that as morality? So if 51% of America right now decided that it was okay to go back to slavery, does that mean that we get to enslave, a certain group of people?
Which, if you follow that, ultimately ends up with the individual.
Right.
If the individual determines that whatever that action is, murder, rape, cheating, stealing, whatever it is, to be okay, then who are you to say that your worldview or your preferences trump theirs?
Yep.
You can't.
Exactly.
So that's where there would be utter chaos if everyone lived according to their truth or whatever they wanted or determined to be okay. But clearly there is a right and wrong, a good and an evil, and atheists know that. And when cornered, they'll admit it, or they will. A few of them will just
flat out, yeah, I'd eat people.
Yeah, a few of them will do that, but which is. I don't believe them. But,
yeah. At least they're being intellectually honest, though.
Yeah, they're being consistent.
Or consistent. That's the word I was looking for.
Let me see. I'm just going to keep going ahead with my notes. So there is a moral obligation that applies to all of us, and we can't each create our own morality. We all know that people shouldn't lie, cheat, steal, murder, rape, etc. And we all know these things are wrong. And it's not because we grew up in a society, as they would say, that told us that these things are wrong, but it's because that the fact that these things are actually written, we would say these things are written on the hearts of every person, not every believer. Like humans have the law written on their hearts. They know right from wrong. That's what a conscience is. So that's the kind of the reason the answer we would give for that. If atheism is true, you can't call anything immoral. You can only say that you don't like it. You can't. You cannot claim that anything is wrong for all people always. There is no absolute morality. You can only say, I prefer to live this way. I prefer to not murder people. Not that murder is wrong, but I just don't do it. That's pretty much the only argument you have if you're being consistent.
And that's usually, I think, a lot of times they'll be like, well, it works best for society, whether it's accepted by society. A lot of times they'll kind of nuance the idea of the societal argument and say like whatever works best to make a functioning society.
Why do you care if society functions?
It all makes no sense.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to play devil's advocate because it's hard for me even in this situation to play because it doesn't click with me. But I'm just kind of reciting some of the arguments that I've heard from them.
Yeah. So, I mean, the atheists would say that certain things are inherently wrong. 99% of them would say that certain things are inherently wrong, condemnable, and should never be done. And in doing so, they do admit to objective morality. And in admitting objective morality and universal moral values, they admit to an objective moral law giver. And in doing so, they undermine their whole argument. Mm-hmm. So if you believe that murder or rape or pedophilia is wrong, without a shadow of a doubt, always for all people in the world, all times, then you believe in absolute morality, objective morality, and that it's not personal preference. And if that is true, there must be a giver of that morality that put it in each one of us.
Yeah, you can't believe in a completely naturalistic world that has no spiritual anything and believe also in a ultimate morality. Those two things don't coincide. You can't have completely natural worldview and also ultimate morality.
Yeah.
They don't work.
And I mean, I have a ton more and we'll get to it, but just to bring back our personal, views on this, it is written on our hearts. Each one of us knows good and evil, to an extent, at least. Good is what God is, and morality is anchored in who God is and his character. And that is the basis for right and wrong. Christians have an anchor for objective moral values. We know what is good, what is bad, but we also know why the good things are good and why the bad things are bad. And there's a rock to stand on these things, where there's a spot to go back to when when talking to people about these things. You don't just say, oh, it's because it's like we have reasons for what we believe.
Yes, exactly. And there's a lot of things that go into that, obviously.
Yeah.
But one of the main things, I think, for each person as a Christian, you start off, and this is obviously subjective. It's difficult. I can't prove to anyone my subjective experience necessarily. But I think that's where it really starts, And so I've had conversations with people, again, who claim that they were atheists. And I remember one in specific with a buddy of mine, and from the past, I guess, we were having a conversation, and I was getting a little bit, I wouldn't say necessarily heated, but I was pushing the passionate. Yeah, that's the word. And he kind of just stopped me at some point, and I wouldn't say that I was winning the argument, but it was just, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, he stopped me and he's like, dude, you're not going to convince me that God is real, or that the God of the Bible, or, Christianity is real, I think is the word that he actually used. I think he said, yeah, you're not going to convince me that Christianity is real. And in that moment, I kind of had felt like God spoke to me and was like, he's absolutely right. We cannot convince people in and of our own intellect or ability that God is real and that God loves them. It takes that initial act of God to work in their heart, and they have to respond to it, right? So people, like, a lot of times I feel like, and this is more to Christians, I think, when we get into conversations with atheists, or even somebody that just doesn't share our worldview, maybe they're a deist, or Muslim, whatever the case is, non-Christian of any kind, we tend to get frustrated
when they won't convert in front of our eyes.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we have to be willing to be patient and let God do his thing.
Yeah.
Like, we don't bring about salvation.
No, we can't change anybody.
Exactly.
You can give them tons of evidences and proofs, and I think we should. Yeah. Yep. But ultimately, you can eat, and I know people like this, you can know these things. Like the stuff we're talking about now, you can be like, oh yeah, atheism doesn't make sense. I've talked to these people. Evolution doesn't make sense. They're like, yeah, it doesn't make sense. And they can know these things, they can acknowledge a creator, but it doesn't change their lives. Like having the information doesn't affect their lifestyle or anything. That's God working in them, and also them, wanting him, as opposed to just having the knowledge of this stuff. Yeah. Do you have anything more?
As far as the
Like morality aspect of anything?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot more to it,
There is,
obviously.
yeah.
But I mean, I think we gave a pretty good overarching reason for why atheism falls apart. The one thing I did want to mention,
I have more on on other stuff. You can keep going. Sorry.
no, you're fine. Is there something, because I don't want to, this is related.
Are you shifting to something else?
Yes, I'm shifting to something else. So if you still have something related to the philosophical or moral argument, let's do that.
I just wanted to mention that like the law is also the law is written on our hearts, but also that a lot of atheists would say, why doesn't God show himself? Mm-hmm. Like if God exists, why doesn't he just like show himself to us? Which the Christian would
that actually was
smirk and laugh. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like we'd say he did. Like that's the basis of our entire belief system is that he did show himself 2,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. But also through, special revelations in nature and through the cosmos and the creation basically. But and then I have some thoughts on like agnostic stuff and stuff that why people don't follow despite the knowledge and such.
Yeah, so I guess mine was a little bit different than that, but in the similar direction. So one of the things I just wanted to touch on is the fact that we look at, and it kind of ties into the moral argument, but goes more towards the scripture, is I've seen a lot of people say, and I don't even necessarily know that this comes from atheists, but just non-Christians, they look at the God of the Old Testament, our God, Yahweh, and they see some of the stuff that's the scenarios or the stories that are portrayed there, and they say, well, God's not even moral. That argument makes
is it Dawkins? I think it's Dawkins. He's like God is evil. He's the most immoral, evil, crazy, psychotic being to ever exist. If the God of the Old Testament is, which is funny, kind of because
even they'll even say it with the New Testament because they'll say like, why would a God who controls all things have to send his son to be murdered?
You're right.
Why doesn't he just and sin goes away? One of the the most fundamental problem with this is who are we to challenge God? If God creates all things, God holds all things together by his will and by his might. Yeah. We, his creation, cannot challenge his authority.
So when they call the God of the Old Testament evil or like crazy or genocidal or whatever else, for a moment in their argument they're like coming to our side for a moment. They're like, all right, let's assume God does exist. And if he does, he's a horrible, horrible being, and then you would say, well, who are you to tell the creator of the universe what is good and what is bad and what is moral?
He dictates what is good and what is moral. If God
he's the basis of these things.
Right. If God decided today that murder was moral, which obviously we know he won't, but hypothetically, then it would become moral because he created it that way.
Morals are
based on the character of God.
They are. That is the proper wording of it too. It's not like God decided not murder is good.
Right.
God's character determines that life is good and not harming people. Your brothers are good. And, that argument doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, it philosophically falls apart because it doesn't. You can't have, if God is the head over all things, you can't say that something that he did puts him below that thing. Yeah, and subjects him to that. You can't subject God to morality because God determines morality. Is basically the way that works.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
So anyway, that was kind of my last piece here on that. So you said you had some things to talk about as far as agnosticism.
Yeah, a little bit. So, I mean, we already said that like most people that say, "Oh, I'm an atheist," they're actually agnostic. An atheist is someone who's without a shadow of a doubt, they would say there is no God, which takes some guts because they're admitting to claiming to know the unknowable almost. Yeah. Even agnostic people are like, I don't know. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I don't think he has anything to do with us, but could there be a being out there? Sure. I don't know all things. The atheist is like, there is no God, which you can't prove that there isn't one.
You can't disprove.
The existence of a higher power.
Right, exactly. It's not philosophically possible.
No, you can't.
So and I think most of the well-known atheists have admitted that, that you can't philosophically.
Once you talk to them about it, they're like, I guess I'm agnostic. But either way, they're like, what difference does it make?
Right.
So I had, most are really agnostic. And a lot of them express their anger at times with a God who they claim doesn't exist. That's something I noticed. You'll notice it with like debates. They get like worked up. They get really passionate about God's lack of existence, which nobody does that with something that they don't really believe exists. A lot of the, like someone said like no one gets angry and passionate about like, no, Bigfoot doesn't exist. Like get really upset about it because they don't, like, who cares?
Because it doesn't affect them.
No, it doesn't.
And if God doesn't exist, then it doesn't affect you if people think that he does.
Exactly. So why do you care so
right,
much? So
exactly.
Yeah, that doesn't really make sense. But yeah, some people, it's weird when you see people get genuinely angry at a God that they claim doesn't exist. And I've seen this happen. Yeah. Someone I've worked with, he said he grew up in a Christian home, went to church, all that. And then he said he claims to be an atheist now. And I think he knows the difference between atheist and agnostic. But he grew up in a Christian home, went to church, and he said he learned about the story of Job. And he said, how could God subject Job to everything he let him go through? He's like, God, not only did God let him go through these things, he basically handpicked Job. He's like, have you considered, Job?
Servant Job, yeah.
And he's like, and as I was talking to him, he was getting like angry as he was saying these things. He's like, if the God exists, he wouldn't let someone go through that. He wouldn't take his family. He wouldn't, let him get this, disease and take his wealth. And, how could God let that happen? He's like, so now I'm an atheist. And I was like, it doesn't sound like you're an atheist. Like nothing you just told me had anything to do with like you not believing God exists. It sounds like you don't like that you did believe God exists. And now you've reached the point where, because you don't like how he may operate, you deny his existence. And he didn't really have much to say after that, but that's definitely something I noticed. It's like, you can't call yourself an atheist in that aspect. You're just mad about how God has handled that particular situation. And I talked to him a little bit about it. I was like, well, I actually love the story of Job because it's his perseverance despite the circumstances around him. Like, I think it's, we can greatly benefit from that story, but he took it in a different direction with that.
It's funny because I just actually over Facebook had a conversation with somebody about that today.
Job?
On Job,
yeah.
Yeah, one of my friends from work had made a post about it. And I mean, it wasn't really, I wouldn't really call it a conversation. It was just a quick couple things back and forth. But it is a story that I think many non-Christians cite a lot of times as being like, look how unjust God is.
This is your loving God.
Right,
like,
that would let his servant be, brought to ruin, all this sort of thing. And it's like, well, yeah, that is my God. Yeah, because I don't get to question what he does. And if he's the God of all things, then I owe him my adoration and my praise. Yeah. And no matter what he decides, he is God. And I don't get to tell him that he should do it my way. It doesn't even make any sense.
And I have
it's a very arrogant argument.
It is.
Fundamentally. Yeah. To be like, well, I think I know better than the God who created me and made me.
You're gonna.
It's like, it doesn't work like that.
You're gonna question. I don't know. It doesn't make sense in my mind. I know. At this point,
we're just beating a dead horse at this point. So,
but I had a couple more thoughts on agnostic. I was watching something on atheism, and it was. I think it was through Answers in Genesis, if I can recall it correctly, but I couldn't find it. I saw it months ago, and the guy on the video said, he's done this. He's like, ask an atheist or an agnostic person, if God did prove that he existed to you personally, would you follow him? Like, if the Christian God was like, this way is true, this is everything that they believe is accurate, would you change your life? And a lot of them still say no. So, why is that? And I have the agnostic doesn't want God to exist, because if he does, they know that he requires more from them than they are willing to give. They don't want to give their lives to him to him for his glory. They want to live their own lives for themselves and for their own glory and pleasure. What they miss is that when you decide, and hold on, I'm going to go back to that. So they want to live their own lives. Mm-hmm. And we both know people like this. Some of them
we're all like this.
We are all like this, but like
at one point in time. So yeah,
specifically, I know people like this that even admit that they believe Christianity to be true, but they're not willing to give up the desires of their sinful desires of their heart to live that life.
Yeah.
So what? And one has told me to my face, like, I don't. I believe it to be true, but I don't want to give up these things, and I don't want to change my life, and I don't want to miss out. Mm-hmm. And what they miss is that when you decide to follow Jesus and devote your life to Christ, he becomes your pleasure. You become delighted in living for him. Your deepest desire is him, and in having him, you lack nothing and you need more. You don't need anything other than him.
Yeah.
So that's like something that they miss. They're like, I don't want to miss out on the sex and the drugs and the drinking and the partying and doing all these things. And then if I become a Christian, I'm going to like think my life is dull and miss out on those things. And I'm like, no, the desires of your heart completely change.
Right.
And you're not even going to want those things.
And if you ask any Christian who used to do those things, who know, and obviously this is anecdotal and subjective, because I'm sure you could probably find some people that are partying now that used to be Christians, like, oh, I love my life way more now but they probably weren't truly following Christ. And if you examined their life, those people that went wayward and are doing those sort of things and saying,
or they're lying to you, and their lives are really empty, and they're just looking for the next emotional high every time they
that could be the case. But there would be no reason for a Christian who no longer does those and the entire world considers to be fun and joyous, or not necessarily joyous, but
fun,
those shallow pursuits to be at least fun. There would be no reason for a Christian to lie, because they have no reason to not go back to those things if Christianity is not the truth. And so if you look at, and again, this is an anecdotal subjective argument, I'm not saying it's a great argument for the existence of God or the truth of Christianity, but I think it is an argument, and I think it does actually work to an extent. That if you look at the lives of a lot of Christians, they'll tell you, no, this is way better than living for the shallow pursuits of the world.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
The joy you get from Christ is better than anything you can experience otherwise. Temporarily. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean it's all rainbows and butterflies.
Absolutely not. Job showed us that.
Yeah. Indeed.
So we talked a little bit about science. We talked about atheism, morality. Then we talked about agnostic people. My last short little, we're already pretty running, long, but I don't know if we could get an entire episode out of this. So I'm going to try to just tack it on here. Mm-hmm. Is like the next step of even closer to God than agnostic is the person who, maybe believes that maybe Christianity is true, but they don't attend church. They don't like devote their lives to Christ. Mm-hmm. Specifically due to a negative encounter with a Christian or Christians as in general and stuff.
Very common.
Yes. So there's still a group who wants nothing to do with Christianity because of hypocrisy, specifically. They say, why would I go to church? It's full of hypocrites. They are right to call it the hypocrisy that they see, but they are wrong in the conclusion that they came to. And this is something I typed on the way to work. I shouldn't have, but if I have a thought, I'm like, I got to put this down or I'm going to forget it.
Just do what I do. Like when I'm running the car and I have like a thought, or like if it's like a song lyric pops in my head, I just record it. Say it out loud.
I don't know how to do that. I can type without looking though. So it's like, is it distracting a little bit, but less.
Guess what?
Less.
Texting is,
you're right. I wasn't texting anybody. I was making a phone note.
Okay. Stop.
All right. Yeah, I shouldn't have, but I had to write it down. But anyways, they're right to call it the hypocrisy that they see, but they are wrong with the conclusion that they come to. You cannot determine the truth of a belief system by how well its followers adhere to it. I'm a follower of Christ. I do my best to live by the standard that he set. But if I go out and end up lying to somebody, me lying doesn't make Christianity false. It means that I fell short of what it means to be a Christian in that moment. Goodness and truth remain goodness and truth, whether I live by them or not. And the existence of Christian hypocrites in no way interferes with the truth that Christianity claims. So using the fact that churches have hypocrites in them as an excuse to not attend or look into the beliefs further doesn't make sense. So you can't say, oh, they're doing it wrong, I don't want anything to do with that. You can say, oh, they're doing it wrong, let me see what they're supposed to do. I can still investigate, look into that, and maybe even live by it.
Yeah.
But to claim an entire belief system shouldn't be followed because people can't properly or don't seem to properly follow that belief system doesn't make sense.
Yep.
That's and especially ruling it all out completely for the rest of your life. That's like if a 400-pound out of shape fitness trainer was like, hey, you should eat a well balanced diet of fruits, vegetables, and meat, and exercise 60 minutes a day, and you were like, no,
who are you?
Yeah, who are you? It's like he's clearly not living the right way, but that doesn't discount what he's saying. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make that false. It means he's a hypocrite. Right. But it doesn't mean what he's saying is not truth. Mm-hmm. So when people, see hypocrites and like, do they even really believe in God? If all you see is, I do agree with them. But if all they saw were Christians, people who call themselves Christians not acting like Jesus, I wouldn't want to join either. Mm-hmm. Would you believe in a God that no one seemed to be changed by when they encountered him? So if they would have an argument to stand on, if no one was changed, if nobody lived according to Christ, and if nobody lived, if people were, all Christians were still living in sin, right. Not still sinning, but if they were all living in sin, then they would have a point, because I wouldn't want to, your religion's false if you're not actually changed by the God that you claim changes lives. So the way we live is a huge testament, to the world of that Jesus is who he said he was.
Yep.
That shouldn't be, as I said, the ultimate test as to whether or not Christianity is true, but it does play a role in, what people think of Christianity. If they don't see us working on ourselves and admitting when we're wrong, they'll be turned off from Christianity and that'll keep, people from wanting to be a part of it. So yeah, as far as people who don't follow, but for that reason, I think, it doesn't make sense. So I just wanted to go through like all the steps of there is no God, to the person who's just not attending because of, stuff they've encountered and whatever else. But
yep, you do find a lot of
Greg,
those.
If you kick my camera
I've done
again,
it so many times, I gotta turn
I'm just kidding.
I gotta turn the leg so it's not right next to my foot.
But yeah, I think we went through quite a lot. I mean, it's been an hour, 15 minutes. So
it was a long episode for sure.
It was a long episode, and we didn't even get to everything. But we covered a lot.
We did. I think we covered a lot of the base arguments for it.
Yeah.
And obviously there's a lot of details left out of that. We can probably make some episodes on like detail, like, okay, this is the details of the fine-tuning argument. This is the details of the philosophical argument. Yeah, we could do those episodes later on. I would like to soon, because I think it almost segues kind of nicely, is I know next week isn't what we're gonna, we got something different for next week, but in the near future I would like to do evidence for Christianity. Christianity. Well, yeah,
all of it. I guess.
All of it, because I think that kind of goes.
Same thing. There's like a science aspect of creation, and then there's the historic evidences of Jesus Christ's actual existence on the earth and stuff like that.
And I think that's something that even a lot of Christians don't know, and they should, because we kind of touched on, like, obviously this whole episode was like the negation of that, like, this is why there has to be a God.
And then there's the opposite, like, these are actual proofs for God, and these are proofs for Jesus' existence. Not only his existence, but his actual doing of miracles, and who he is who he said he was, and stuff like that. Sure.
So that'll be good. Next week, anyway, we'll be getting into a topic that's a little bit more for the church, because obviously this episode, Christians can glean from this episode, take it away and be able to use it to use it in evangelistic tactics or apologetics, those sorts of things from this episode. But obviously also atheists could listen to this, or agnostics, anybody could listen to this and potentially get something from it. But next week we're talking about the Enneagram and some stuff that's kind of getting into the church and causing Christians to not live according to God's word. So it's going to be an important episode for anybody watching this that's a Christian. If you've heard of the Enneagram, tune in next week, because we're going to talk about that and get into some things that are attached to that. It's going to be an interesting episode.
Tune in.
Yeah, tune in. So thanks for watching this episode. We appreciate it if you made it through the whole thing. Again, if you can support us by subscribing, sharing, liking, anything, we really appreciate it. It helps us out. It makes us be inspired to do this more. And it gives us a little bit more joy in doing it, knowing that it's actually producing something. I think we can all kind of understand that to an extent. You know, anytime you do something, you don't do it for the reward, but the reward is always nice. So it's nice to just know, like, hey, you know, we're actually getting something from this. So,
and our reward is not even really like a monetary thing. It's like reaching more people.
Yeah,
is the reward we're looking for here.
Yep. I mean, in the future, if by God's grace this actually went somewhere to where we were like, okay, maybe we'll do more of this, then maybe at that point we'd start talking about raising funds and stuff like that. But for now, we don't want any money. We just want people to hear the good news. That's it.
Yeah.
Good?
I'm good.
Cool. All right. Well, have a great week, guys. And we will be back next week again with the episode on the Enneagram. A lot of things that go with that. It's going to be a good episode, good for a lot of Christians to hear, and be awakened to some of these false doctrines and lies that are getting brought by kind of a Trojan horse into the church. So,
all right.
Yeah. See ya.
See ya.